Hello, my name is Ramon Espinoza, branch manager at Nexa Mortgage. I've been a loan officer for 22 years now, and today we're going to talk about the home buying process. So, we get started with talking to a home buyer. Usually the agent, the real estate agent, Garrett and Amy are very good about getting the buyer to a lender as soon as that's the very first step after they've done the buyer consultation. So once we speak to the client, we determine whether the client can get pre-qualified for X amount loan amount, purchase price, how much money they got down, if they need seller concessions, all that. I call it the triangle. The triangle should be the realtor as at the top of the triangle. And at the other two corners is the buyer and the lender. When the triangle stays together, it's very impactful. As soon as that triangle breaks in any way, issues awry, and that's when loan officer and realtor work together trying to fix the issue. But let's not digress. So we get the buyer pre-qualified, we get their documentation. Usually what goes into documentation is think of everything in 2-year buckets. So where have you lived for 2 years? Where have you worked for the last 2 years? Have you switched jobs? When did you start? When did you stop? And then pay stubs for the last 30 days. So that's the documentation we really need to make a very accurate decision on whether the buyer can go out shopping. So we gather the documentation. We're all on the same page. The realtor and I discuss, okay, how much money do they need? How much do they have? What's their purchasing power? And then we go off and look at homes. So they go find a home, we get the contract. The contract comes in. This is very important for everybody to know. It takes about 24 hours for the lender to send out. By law, you have 3 days, but it takes about 24 hours to get the loan estimate and the intent to proceed to the buyer. Those are two important documents because they have to look at their fees to make sure they're what we talked about in the beginning. And two, the intent to proceed triggers next steps for the loan process. So if you say in your contract or call me and say, can I order the appraisal as soon as I give you the contract? The answer is not yet, because the buyer has to sign that intent to proceed. As soon as the intent to proceed comes in, now we're ready to rock and roll ordering the appraisal. So the intent to proceed goes out, the buyer signs it, we get the loan package together and we submit to processing. The processor will get the file. They cross all the T, dot all the I's, make sure everything's in line. If there's any questions, they come back to me or the buyer and really button up the file. I call it painting a picture. You want to paint the best picture possible for the underwriter to see what you're seeing. Explain it, write letters, cover letters. As a loan officer, I write plenty of letters, making sure the underwriter understands exactly what I'm saying and then follow up with the documentation. So the underwriter looks at it. The underwriter is the final decision maker on whether a file is approved. An experienced loan officer should have a pretty good idea, but loan officers' mistakes, they didn't get the proper documentation, something happened, job gaps, blah, blah, blah. So the underwriter gives the approval. Now we have an approval. The next big step is called the closing disclosure. The closing disclosure is very important for realtors to understand that nothing can happen legally unless the buyer signs the closing disclosure. And once the closing disclosure is signed, the buyer can't sign any legal documentation for 3 days. Let's talk about days, for example. So holidays don't count and Sundays don't count. The day of signing did count. So if I sign the closing disclosure on a Monday, that's day 1. Tuesday, day 2. Wednesday, day 3, you can sign legal docs on Thursday. Okay, so just be aware of that. Be aware of every lender and when they issue the closing disclosure. Some do it at the end. That could be risky if you get close to the end. You're at crunch time. Your closing date's tomorrow, and the lender just issued the closing disclosure. You're not going to close. It's impossible to close. The consumer has to have 3 days signed closing disclosure before they can move on. Okay, so now we signed the closing disclosure. The underwriter, all files usually go through 2 passes. The first one, you get your approval letter, And then they may ask for an updated pay stub. Did the earnest money clear? Little stuff like that. We submit that. The appraisal came in. We submit it for final. Once we get final approval, that file moves over to what's called the document department. The document department can't just hit a button and say, here's your docs. So they have to start communicating with title to do what's called balancing. So they look at every fee, every penny on both sides, make sure the sellers, all their information's in there, what they're gonna net, everything's buttoned up at that point. When that is finalized, that's when docs go to title. So title goes in. Remember, very important point. Your closing date on the contract should not be your signing date. And your signing date typically is not your closing date. You should be signing legal documents 3 business days before the contract close of escrow date. Okay? So when we get the docs to title, the docs have to come back to the lender. They verify all the information, all the signatures, all the money, everything's good to go. Then we set up funding. Funding is, we all agreed, everything's cool, seller sign, buyer sign. We order the wire, the bank orders the wire. So it's not instantaneous. Just remember, wires are coming from the Federal Reserve out of New York. That's why wire cutoffs sometimes have to be at the latest, like depending on the bank, but about 2 p.m. Arizona time. Okay, so the wires come and it gets received by title. Once title receives the wire, they send it out to the county recorder's office. The buyer doesn't own the property until the county says it's recorded. So we get the money, they send it out to the county recorder's office, they send in the money, and voila, it's recorded. That's when you have fun. Now the realtor gets to really shine at this point and give those keys. Amy and Garrett will give the keys to the buyer, and they're going to be so excited to have ownership. The American dream. Gotta love it. Again, my pleasure to serve. Ramon Espinoza. Love what I do, helping buyers. Give us a call anytime. Take care.